Promise that you sing about me forever. Promise that you sing about me forever. Promise that you sing about me forever.
So all you would need to do is go to VIEISME.com, VISME.com, and that's where you will find everything about Memoirs of a Forgotten Child and also what I've been up to. I do daily blogs, so it would be in the blog section. I also do YouTube videos, so it would be in the YouTube videos. And for the book, you can either go to the book, which details what's inside the book and the reason of it coming into existence. And if you already know all that because you watched all my YouTube videos, then you go to the store tab. And at the store tab is the back cover and the front cover together. And you would just click the miniature version of the book, and then you would get to the book page. And then you would get to the cart, and all you gotta do is click add cart and proceed from there. This video is going to be about games. And my last video, when I stated that black men are the biggest haters, I said that I was going to make a video about games, and this is the video. And just like last video where I talked over the pictures that I was showing, I'll be doing the same thing with this video. My last video wasn't to offend, and of course it was not all inclusive. It was certain black men, but I felt like I needed to make this because whether you were the extreme or you were picking off your own kind, aka black men killing other black men, or you were just trolling and just being super disrespectful, I just thought that on both sides it was very hateration, as they say. And I think as black people, we cannot afford to hate each other, to diss each other, to hate on each other, to dismiss each other, to troll each other. Like, we should be unifying. And it's not just black men, just black people in general, children, women, whatever. We should be trying to come together instead of knocking each other down. So yeah. So let's get to it, and I'll explain why I say games completely decimate the black community in 3 different factions. And hopefully you understand where I'm coming from with this, and if you vibe with it, please let me know. So like I said, this video will be about why black men being in prison due to games, but other factors too, why black men are in prison and how that is detrimental. There are 3 factions where I see that being incarcerated, especially as a black male, how that totally completely demolishes the black community, and I'll be detailing each one. So the first one is the prison industrial complex. I'm pretty sure you have heard that phrase before. If you haven't, then I suggest that you should check out Michelle Alexander's book called The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration. It is a bomb book. I actually read it. I actually did a paper on it in college, and I suggest that you should, because a lot of people have the perception of, well, you do the crime, you do your time, that's just life, you know, no free rides, you deserve what you get, lock the key, it is what it is. But when you read the book, you see a deeper insight on the prison industrial complex, how right after slavery was quote unquote abolished, the prison industrial complex swoops right in to take that service. And surprise, surprise, it happened to be black men who were targeted the most. Black people in general, but specifically black men. There were certain laws created back then where if you didn't have a job on January 1st of the year, then you ended up in prison. If you looked at a white person, you ended up in prison. If you exerted any type of masculinity, then you ended up in prison. And these sentences were long. Some of them ended up picking cotton right back, even though they were quote unquote free. Some of them ended up working in coal mines. It was just basically slavery repackaged. And in the 80s, the prison industrial complex had a booming process with the Reagan administration basically taking drugs into the black community and decimating it for everything that it was worth. A lot of families ended up having drug addiction problems. A lot of families ended up in prison for selling the drugs. You could see big SWAT machines going into neighborhoods, shootouts. It was just a mess. And surprise, surprise, it was only in the black community that was totally affected.
Still to this day, you have people who are incarcerated for itty bitty crack rocks. They're serving tremendous, ridiculous sentences. And though there are more white people who do drugs, and people do sell to their own race, meaning white sells to white, Asian sells to Asian, Hispanic sells to Hispanics, which makes sense because you're usually around your own people. But black men are targeted the most, and a lot of black men are in prison. In the book The New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander made an example of how crack sentences compared to cocaine sentences, and cocaine is mostly a white rich drug versus crack is a poor black man's drug. A person who's using crack would serve more time than a person who's doing cocaine, even though cocaine is more potent and cocaine is a drug that's used widely. The sentences are determined by race. White men tend to have less of a sentence or slap on the hands versus black men who tend to have longer, harder sentences. There's also drug rehab for white men and white women, whereas for black people there's no such thing. Right now you see there's this whole epidemic of white people using meth, using heroin, and now the whole thing isn't mass incarceration, lock them up, crack is whack. Now it's, oh, let's find some type of rehab, let's have a safe haven for them to do drugs. I mean, really? There's this whole concept of let's take care of them, let's nurture them, let's not be harsh, let's baby them into sobriety. Whereas when it was black people back in the 80s, it was like they are destructive, they are ruthless, they are vultures, lock them up, they're worthless anyways. So you see those two comparisons. I'll be going into details on why prison screws black people 3 ways in one. It's basically you get 3 things out of 1 action. Now in prison, a lot of people don't know about prison labor, and a lot of people are shocked to find out that prison labor is a big business. I think IKEA actually makes furniture off of prison labor, and you would think, oh, well, you're in prison, you deserve what you deserve, and even though you have to work these hours, and you make a certain amount of money, it is what it is, at least you're getting paid. And what people don't know, they're getting cents off a dollar, something that in the free world, no one, not even an illegal person, would take as a form of payment. People are getting paid 15 cents, 20 cents, 25 cents an hour. And they are working for corporations like AT&T, who has call centers. They are working for Whole Foods. You can get your health food on, but it may come with a prison tag. Companies like AT&T make a lot of money off of, collect call from inmate, yada, yada, yada. Those people who are providing those telephone calls, those are major charges. And that is another avenue that I want to go into about how that is a burden on families. Debt. Before I go into the debt conversation, I do want to thoroughly explain how companies are making money off of prison labor. Now, in a free world, there is such thing as minimum wage, even though some people try to get away with it by paying you less than minimum wage. But the overall stature is make a certain amount of money. I know in Massachusetts, I think the minimum wage is like $8.50. It may be $9 now, but when I was in high school and I was working in the summer, we were getting minimum wage and it was $8.50. Now, $8.50 can't do nothing for you. So imagine what 15 cents can do for you. Absolutely nothing. And there's no such thing as benefits. There's no such thing as vacations. There's no such thing as sick days. You're a prisoner. There's no such thing as, oh, well, this is 8 hour. Now I owe you overtime. There's no such thing as that. And then some prisons, they actually punish you for not working. You must work. And it is a new form of slavery because it's basically, I can take advantage of you. I can make economic advances off of you and I don't have to pay you anything. And was that not slavery? You have officers on horses and big open fields with convicts and inmates picking and doing whatever they're doing. Maybe they're picking oranges, maybe they're planting, and you see like an overseer, the officers just watching and making sure these inmates are in line. And I'm like, am I the only person who sees that this is wrong? And the Private prison stocks are being exchanged on the stock market. People are investing and making money. So once it becomes a business, you want your business to thrive, whether it is mass incarceration or anything else. So you're not going to do anything to harm that. So that's why you're seeing these new harsher laws and harsher sentences, things that you would deem are ridiculous, things that would be a slap on the hand or community service. If you don't have quote unquote affluenza, which basically if you're rich, you just have no sense of common sense or accountability, which most people aren't rich and most people aren't white, that doesn't apply to you. So you see how this whole making money off of people's imprisonment, making corporations rich off of people's imprisonment is wrong, and how people are profiting off of that. And unfortunately, it's a lot of black men who are in that system. Debt. Now, like I was saying with phone companies like AT&T, there is such thing as debt. Common times when you watch movies or television show, you think of debt where a prisoner owes so and so amount of cigarettes or commissary and they didn't pay them back, and you think of ruthless measures that an inmate would do to another inmate. But what isn't talked about is the prison debt that the inmate face for having to repay things back. Certain things are on credit, like you may have to pay for your own materials like toilet paper and toothbrushes and things like that they may give on credit, but that is owed back to the prison. And the cheapest things that you would find out in the free world, like a couple noodles, like for $1, in prison it may just be more money because it's so rare. You're behind closed doors. It's not like you can go to, I don't know, Dollar Tree and buy you a pack of ramen noodles. You're locked up. And like I was saying with AT&T and other corporations taking advantage of families who are usually poor to begin with but want to keep in contact with that family member, they charge you a ridiculous amount of money for a phone call. A phone call, you know, you got your little whatever plan, maybe $40, $50, $60 for unlimited. When you're calling someone, it's like a collect call. They may charge you maybe 15 cents a minute, 20 cents a minute, 50 cents a minute, and you're thinking in your mind like, oh, that's not that much, but it adds up. Especially if there's frequent calls, especially if it's long calls, you just don't know until you get that bill. And a lot of families end up paying a tremendous amount of energy and time to go see their family members. Because you did a crime, let's say in Massachusetts, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get sentenced in Massachusetts. You may get sentenced to Cook County, Sing Sing, wherever. And if you are in Massachusetts and your family members are all over the country, it's hard to see them on a regular basis. A phone call may be sufficient, but maybe you want to go see that person, or maybe you have kids and you want your kids to see the father, and to travel and hotel and to book. It is a tremendous amount of pressure and a tremendous amount of time and resources that you don't have, and there are people making money off of that. There are certain towns where the whole community is making money off of prison inmates. There are certain facilities that are making the clothes. There's certain facilities that are making the food. Then you have to hire the guards. Then you have to make the uniforms. Like, there are certain communities that live off of prisoners being imprisoned, and they're not going to let the laws slip or loosen or allow inmates to be self-sufficient when they are let go out of prison, so they will never come back. A lot of prisoners actually end up right back in prison in a certain amount of time, because once you have that title of being locked up, especially when you catch a felony, the society basically ousts you and you really have limited resources. So of course they're not going to say, oh, I want you to do better so you can never come back here. This whole community thrives off of a person or group of people being in prison, so why would they F up their money? That doesn't make sense. So of course they're thriving off of that. Of course they want the prison industrial complex to continue. In certain states, inmates are counted into the population, which gives certain states advantages when it comes to making political decisions. And it's not like these people can vote, especially when you catch a felony, but because there are bodies in the state, they get counted. And even though they don't have a say-so, well, just like a slave. A slave only amounted to 3/5 of a human being, aka a white person. They get counted. And it's the same thing for today. And a lot of people are not making that comparison. Now, when it is, like I said, with white people getting hooked on drugs, now let's come in and save the day and do a thorough research and try to bring in other resources besides prison. But when it's black folks, it's like, throw away the key, you deserve it, you're worthless, you're disgusting, you're just soaking up our resources, and you deserve to do the time. And the last way it screws up black people, especially black men, is a lost generation. I know there have been many articles written about lost generations where are these black men, and there's a certain amount of black women, 2 black men, and they're rare, and they're this and they're that. And this is true. And it's not necessarily in prison. I mean, if you're in a gang life, I mean, how long do you live? If you're over 25, you're considered an OG. Outside the gang life, you're still a child. So you have multiple people dying. You have multiple men who are losing, whether it's during funeral service, right before the burial process, whether it's in gangs. Because, I mean, really, how long do you have to live when you're in a gang? If you're 25 and older, you're considered an OG. In the real world, outside of gang life, you're still considered a child. You really haven't lived. You lived a quarter of a century. Like, what do you know? And it's detrimental because there's a lot of black women. What are the options to choose? Who's going to model and shape and mold these young boys coming up? You have a lot of men who are raised by their mothers, and yes, they are functional men. They still have the testosterone, still have the penis, but mentally, psychologically, they have very feminine attributes, very feminine characteristics. The way they talk, their way they think, their behavioral patterns is like a pseudo female. And it's due to a lot of men just not being there to represent. A lot of men are not being there to raise these boys. I know a couple of males personally, they have very feminine characteristics. They're not gay, at least to my account, they're not gay. But the things that they do, the way that they act, their mentality is very effeminate. And I don't want to be rude and say, you kind of like on the borderline gay line. So, you want to get, a little more bass in your voice, a little more testosterone, be manly. It's not my job to tell a man how to be a man. But you see this with a lot of boys. A lot of boys don't know what is manhood, how to enter manhood, what are the things that they are supposed to do as men. And they find themselves lost because it's either being a gay male, which is accepted, a feminine male, which a lot of boys are turning into, where it's like, I'm not gay, but I carry feminine characteristics, or I could just be an anomaly and just say screw society and just be a degenerate and either pick off other black men in the community, black on black crime, or robbing and pillaging and raping. And those are really the 3 options for black men. Of course, now this is not all black men. Other black men choose other avenues, like being business owners, being teachers, being counselors, not going through the boxes that society puts black men in. But I do see a lot of black men falling for the traps, whether it's the trap life, selling drugs, trap life, being effeminate, trap life of just saying, it's screw it, I'm just gonna be gay. And I'm not saying being gay is something that you think of and you just say, I mean, pros and cons, I might as well just do it. But I do feel like society shapes it and makes it seem like it's an okay option versus someone just saying, this is how I've always been. And I see this particularly with black men. A lot of black men don't know where to go, don't know who they are, don't know what black masculinity is. They know what white masculinity is. They may know other groups and other ethnics masculinity is, but black male masculinity, if you're looking at it from a society standpoint or media standpoint, it is totally and completely screwed. And I think a lot of black boys need that encouragement and need that role model, because your mama can only show you so much. I even make the comparison, especially when it comes to women who are like, oh, I can raise a boy and I can turn into a man and all this other stuff. I'm like, very early when it comes to potty training, you can't even potty train your boy, because all you can tell him to do is sit, because that's what you do. But that's not what he does as a man. He has to stand up, and you can't even tell him how to shoot because you don't shoot. you squat. So even with that, very early on, you can't even help the boy. So at whatever age children get potty trained, I'm not sure, I don't have kids, you can't even help your child with that. So how are you going to teach a boy who's 16 and he's 6'2" and he's 180 pounds? Like, what are you going to teach him? What are you going to do? You're going to baby him to a state where he can't do for himself, where he is scared, where he is effeminate, where he is having pseudo male energy, very feminine energy, and you think it's safe. But he's a black male in a white supremacy society. Whether he is so-called safe, they're not going to see that, and they will try him, and sometimes they try him with a bullet. So with that being said, those are the 3 ways I see how being in gangs and the prison industrial complex, how it screws black people. And one part I didn't really go thorough into, which kind of goes along with debt, is the funeral process. Now, when I was in college, I went to the only black funeral place in Massachusetts, right? And the woman told me, like, clean cut, no holds bars, what it's really like. She's like, I'm the only black minority business who is in a funeral business. The majority of people are white. They do not care about black people. They do not understand black people. They don't understand our practices, but they're making a lot of money off of it. A lot of black people end up in debt trying to bury their family members that other people take advantage of. When you're grieving, you're more likely to sign off of anything, and there are things that you don't necessarily need, but because I can take advantage of you grieving, I can tell you, you need these expensive things, you need this expensive coffin, you need this when you need that when you really don't. And the average funeral cost for like the most minimum bare bones type of thing is 10 grand. Most people don't have 10 grand just like that just to pull out. So a lot of black people are asking around family and friends to borrow money, or some of them are just going into debt, taking out loans just to bury their family members. And let's say you are in the gang life, that's not just a family member, that's several family members yearly that you're burying if they don't end up in the prison industrial complex. So you're taking debt upon debt, and you're never getting that person back. You're never going to get that money back. And it's crushing black people. It's crushing. You see women, moms, sisters, cousins, even fathers, uncles, whoever are falling out crying, grieving, yet you see black men still in gangs. And I do want to make it clear, this is not only a black man thing. I know girls who are in gangs too. I'm not saying that, just black men are just horrible. I'm just saying these critiques because I do think we need to do better, especially when the prison industrial complex targets specifically black men. So black men have to think better. You got to think strategically. You got to think like the spook who sat by the door, because if anybody they're going to try to cipher into the prison industrial complex is going to be you. And then after you, it's going to be me, black women. So these are certain things that I wanted to bring up because, like I said, when I made my other video about black men being the biggest haters, I did briefly go over gangs and how the prison industrial complex kind of creeps its way in. But I wanted to make it a little bit more thorough, and hopefully it makes sense to you. Hopefully you get what I'm saying. And if you do want to read thoroughly about the prison industrial complex, like I said, pick up Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. It's definitely an eye-opener. That is this video.
So that is my video on gangs, but mostly about the prison industrial complex and how that all intertwines. Hopefully that information gives you a clearer insight on how I was trying to go about it, and it makes sense to you. If you have any comments, please leave them below. Tell me what you think about my video. Let me know if you've experienced any family members who were affected by the 80s ambush of drugs, the mass incarceration, funerals, or anything like that. Please let me know in the comments below. And like I said, this video is not supposed to be all-inclusive to black men, because not all black men are in prison. Obviously, not all black men catch felonies. And I didn't say in the video, but once you catch a felony, you might as well just not exist. And I don't mean that in the sense of just commit suicide. I mean this in the sense of society will oust you. When you are a black person, especially a black male, society doesn't even vibe with you like that. But once you catch that felony, society totally washes their hands off of you. And you really have to think in the sense of going back to that low life behavior or establishing yourself outside of the status quo, meaning being your own business person. And a lot of people don't think on that scope. No, a lot of people don't think on that mentality because it's usually get a job, to be a good person, good grades, and fit yourself inside of society. And what happens when society ousts you, when you do catch a felony. So that is something to be mindful of, that when you come into the prison and you get out of prison, you're not necessarily safe. Your actions and the time that you pay for those actions are not totally washed out. Sometimes you are labeled, and those labelings will affect you throughout your life. When you do catch a felony, I'm not pretty sure, but from what the last time I checked, you really can't get into colleges because you really can't get financial aid. Certain housing, like let's say housing subsidies like Section 8 or whatever, they won't accept you. You can't vote. So your opinions don't matter, even though it does. So there's a lot of things that affect you once you get into the prison industrial complex. And like I said, this is not all black men. And yes, there are a large number of black women in prison too. But I wanted to make that extremely clear on my thoughts on why the prison industrial complex and being in gangs totally dissipates the black community. Hopefully you understand where I was coming from. So yeah. And comment, rate, and share. And as always, be blessed and out.